This is another message from the underground. The voice of Free Earth, brought to you by Seils, straight from the source. You are here now with a special purpose to fulfill. And you are not alone. This is it, family. It's up to us. One planet, one spiritual source, in a multitude of forms. Stay human. Protect the planet. Raise the consciousness.
Hi guys, thanks for joining us for the Actualising Independence series. Today we're going to be talking about sovereignty in the shadow. In order to embrace the significance of what we are, we must become present to all that opposes it. For it is our ability to continually embrace what we fear, to willingly expose what is hidden, and gracefully integrate our brilliance, which allows us to experience a perpetuity of untold freedom. In these mind-made illusions of shame, guilt, and the disease of comparison, which has us chasing shadows, it robs us of life's greatest gift as we come to accept ourselves as a single and absolute creator. Jason Reynolds, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Paul. It's great to be here. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. So we're going to be, sovereignty is certainly becoming a hot topic at the moment, and people are moving more into that conversation, particularly in relation to what's, people moving into common law groups and understanding law and that sort of thing as well. So let's talk a little bit more about sovereignty in the shadow. So we're talking about the personal shadow or the collective shadow?
Well, it's independently, the only thing that we can have a impact on is ourselves. And we can have an impact upon others through our own example. So yes, when we observe what's going on in the collective, it may point to where we can actually action or liberate that within our own selves. But the first place to start is with ourselves. We're under the illusion that we're here to change others. That's when we as individuals become disempowered, we become disenfranchised, and we start looking for things like community because we want other people to share in our collective pain or pleasure. So it's our freedom demonstrated through independence that allows us to perform what freedom is. And, it's why sovereignty these days is becoming, as you say, a hot topic, is because there's less of it around us and present to us. A couple hundred years ago, the Constitution of this country spoke about sovereignty and was all about sovereignty. Sovereignty was, the aspect and the basis for all of, the free world and the individual to travel openly, freely, and direct themselves in however they chose. So sovereignty it's like consciousness, arose because there was a lack of and a suppression of it. So the life cannot exist without balance. So to suggest that sovereignty is becoming a hot topic, it's then about taking responsibility on where I've neglected that within my own self, and maybe through the fact that I trusted in some sort of structure or system around me that was going to provide me with that, but it's not. So sovereignty is an essential aspect of our existence. And it's, the laws of this country, the laws of the land, the laws of things well beyond any document that we can put our hands on, suggest that we are the supreme power. And we've spoken about this before. This is not just in, ancient text or mystical spaces or philosophy. This is the basis of our law. This is the basis of the Australian Constitution and many right constitutions that exist around the world for the betterment of people. So we can talk about sovereignty, but if we continue to project that upon what someone else is going to provide us, we are doing the absolute opposite. Sovereignty is our ability to be able to recognize our own independence, but the significance and value of what it is that we have to express in life. I'd look at this, Paul. Years ago when we get told about generational wisdom. Where is generational wisdom these days? Where is the conversation? And I'm not saying that this is across the board, but the greater majority of Western society has been taken away from those times of sitting around a fire, camping, with the purpose of sharing wisdom, like a rite of passage from, mother to son, mother to daughter, father to son and daughter, and so on, and a family being able to share in that type of experience. But here's the kicker with this. We can talk about it, but what it actually suggests, which can be quite confrontational, is it me as a father or as a role model of some sort within the community? I don't believe there's anything valuable enough that I'm going to take my time to share with someone else as essential for them to learn. Then we've got to question into our own self, well, what is it that I represent? What is it that I stand upon? What is it that I stand for? So we've got to look at that within our own selves. Why wouldn't it be, out of all of my years, that I would want to be able to encapsulate, be able to articulate, and be able to express? And I would recommend for every single individual that's, honored us with their presence here and listening to the recording, is consider, can you take 15 minutes a day, an hour a day, an hour a week, just to look at the things in your life that are essential, not just for yourself, but that you would share with others for the betterment and the elevation of their existence. This is where we take responsibility. Yes, there should be generational wisdom, but how am I doing that? What is it that I've encapsulated, refined to such a degree that other people can understand it and benefit from it? Most importantly, and my child or those that are adhering to me in some sort of, authority or some sort of direction or some sort of guidance in life. So it's a really important part where we step out of this robotic idea of philosophy and politics and talking about things, as a man will be known by their actions. And the thing is, this is where we can talk about philosophy. We've got to get past all this new age junk, the circus, the conversations that do not have any direction towards completion and action and the manifestation of our own individualized expression. So much gets lost if we don't allow ourselves to stop and reflect upon what we are. But to me, sovereignty, if I want to be independent and I want to represent that, I've got to also take the time to represent what my values are, what it is I believe to be true, and how I can encapsulate that as a principle that I can share with others to enliven and brighten their lives. But here comes the important part, that by the default of doing that, you enrich your own life by understanding what it is that makes you what you are. This is the beauty. There's a concept in certain teachings of a statement, is it in my highest good? And the intention being, when we communicate with ourselves, to ask, is it in my highest good? So this action that I'm intending on taking, or these doors that I have in front of me, is in my highest good to head in this direction or that direction, which requires building not a temporary, not an occasional, not a convenient relationship with our own inner resonance, but an absolute and certain one, because without certainty, there's no trust. Yeah. So what we need to do is be not tipping into this frequency or this relationship with ourselves. We need to get into a point where it is the only thing, and we're maintaining that as the basis of foundation before we start seeking direction. But let's go back to the highest good. The nature of the highest good is that when something's in my highest good, it is also in other people's highest good. But our limited capacity to perceive that when we take action, how in a longer term, not maybe at this very moment, and not by someone coming up and celebrating and saying what you did was amazing for me and it really helped me, without those types of feedback, when we can tap into a deeper sense and we can start to act upon what is in our highest good, ultimately it's in everyone's highest good, as long as they are intending to be the highest expression of them, which is then, again, what leads towards sovereignty. So it's the same thing here with generational wisdom. When we're doing something to serve us, to become present to what it is and the truth of what we are and the beauty and the value we have to share, by default, that starts to become embodied, and it starts to blossom through us as a habit rather than an aspiration or a good idea. And then when we share it, we're sharing it from a place of representation of the example. And what that means is that, look, we've all tried to tell a dog to sit, and it's looked at us as if there's not a chance I'm doing that. But then we say it, and it seems to be that dog just jumps to attention. When we embody, and we are already predisposed to the outcome, and this is in the making of a decision. If you're making the decision that dog's going to sit, it will communicate and will feel that. If you're making a decision when you're speaking to someone else, you're not worried about whether they're listening or not. But we tend to worry about these particular aspects of our own communication and our receiving through others when we are asking for permission for people to listen to us because we haven't recognized our own value or sovereignty. So we've got to, the only one that can change that in our life is us. We can learn and read as much as we like, but if we don't take that step to action it, if we do not take the step to move into it, sovereignty becomes the design of someone else's creation, not our own. So, this is, where freedom, if we look at sovereignty and we go into the shadows of that,
Well, I was just going to ask you about the sovereignty side of things as well, Jason, because, pretty much since this thing started in March last year, there's been a lot of knowledge. And as we started the conversation about a lot of people moving into the common law conversations and trying to find remedy, et cetera, and have themselves be educated. But there is also, there's been a high influx of social media influencers and profile for people that are sort of looking to be informed. But it's sort of I have a tendency to sort of, for myself, when I went through a phase, but what seems to be occurring at the moment in the collective, there's a lot of people gathering information and data, but not actually implementing anything at the moment.
Yeah, I would say that they're attracting people that are doing the same. I would say that there's a perfect balance in marriage that's existing, that people are seduced by celebrity and by popularity and by the amount of views that someone may be getting, rather than the ability to be able to discern that, well, this is just, I'm hearing the same thing over and over again. There is no difference to watching mainstream media if you continue to keep listening to people commentating on, the destruction of our Constitution and the lack of our rights that are being maintained, and the evil deeds that some, alleged pedophiles are around the world. I'm not going to disclose my perspective on it because that's not for me to do. That is a confusion and an arrogant interruption into people's lives. But if that's what they are seeking and that's what they want, there is plenty of that discussion. That's not what we're here to do in this particular point of discussion. We're here to bring forward the simplicity of our own unification with ourselves. And, this is where freedom is found. We don't become sovereign by intending to become sovereign. We become sovereign by removing and releasing all of those things that we've taken on, that we have held on to, that we have maintained, that we have put trust or faith into, that oppose our sovereignty. So, we must first understand what sovereignty is before we can start to seek it. I mean,
well, that's the thing. It's I know we've covered it previously in the previous episodes in this series, but let's for the uninitiated, what's your contextual, what's your subjective interpretation of the term or the definition of sovereignty?
It's the actualization of authenticity. So if we go back to the root of what authenticity is to act by one's own authority, or the word authentic. This is what it is all about, is to act by our own authority. Sovereignty is the space that we create and the expression of that. So it's our reckon. It's not. It can be, and an element of it can be defined by a documentation of that. I'm no longer under this particular jurisdiction or law or space. But as I've spoken to, been very lucky to speak to some people that I believe are world experts on understanding the unraveling of the birth certificate fictions and all of these types of things in our life that supposedly take our sovereignty. But there's still no definitive pathway through that. There is people that have, invoked certain aspects, but to do this as a whole, there's a whole range of things that need to be addressed. But then how they still operate within society in a way that supports them. So there's a complex understanding that exists there. But sovereignty must first be found within our own self, and then we will start to attract and bring into our life the consistencies that we have in acting in that way. And we'll start to see those hypocrisies and inconsistencies in our life. We don't need to go looking for them. By becoming sovereign in our own state and being authentic and true to us is recognizing where we are not, and then being able to dissolve and move through that in such a way that we continue to create from a place of our own spawning.
But sometimes it's also a journey of discovery as well. And just to return back to what you were saying before about sort of rites of passage and generational wisdom and that sort of thing as well. I've been seeking for the last couple of years, actually, sort of even trying to find some origines or some original elders to sit with. And, I had a sense and an intuition of this time. And first of all, they're difficult to find. And it is a real missing, particularly with the Anglo-Saxon, Western society, with that rites of passage. And there isn't the whole thing about the elderly getting shoved into aged care, projects and that sort of thing, and not being around to be able to impart any of their knowledge that they've experienced from that generational experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and then the willingness to want to hear that as well. I mean, if we look at, sometimes that may be sad, but it's a reality that we must work with. But we've got to accept it, first of all, that most of us become stimulated or motivated by pain. It's not until we don't have, or we've lost, or we've taken away, or we experience something that's discomforting that we then go, I've got to do something about this. And then we become directed in that particular momentum, which is great. But and it's a starting point, but eventually we've got to come to a stage where we can capture that misunderstanding in its infancy before it becomes a problem in our life. And we stop dealing with problems, we start moving through things with a greater state of ease. So if we were to look at, when we don't have what we want in our life and where we're troubled by anxiety and trauma and tragedies in our life, we then suddenly start seeking, well, how do I address this? But at this particular point, that requires the individual to find trust beyond a system like, well, even if I don't agree with it, I'm going to go to the doctor because I feel like this could be really painful, but I don't agree with that. So it's only at that particular point where it becomes really important to develop a level of trust in oneself to be able to guide and direct them towards a long-term, a perpetual solution to life, rather than one that is determined by a system that they denounce.
Yeah. So can I just ask you about sovereignty as well? Because some people also speculate that the concept of sovereignty is some sort of wide-eyed, highly held, idealism, the same as impartiality in media. That's like it's unattainable, and there's some people that will never either deserve or are capable of self-sovereignty. Yeah,
for sure. For sure. I think that there's a journey that people go through because they're not willing to accept their own worthiness in that space to become, considered and sovereign. So, look, the very definition of sovereignty is said about how I see it, but sovereignty is a state of independence. So for us as individuals, yes, it has been defined by law and other aspects of what it means and people's opinions, but sovereignty itself is our own state of independence. So what that requires of us individually is we need to go within our own self and identify how it is that we are different and learn to love that. But what we have been indoctrinated with is how to be the same, from wearing a uniform at school, from having manners, from road rules, and a whole range of things, that there's levels of organization that complement this. But we've got to have the ability to discern when that is a part of organization compared to when that's a part of indoctrination. So as I said before, the greatest challenge that we have to overcome is the seduction of community. We come together as people, not as a force, not as a suggestion, not as a banner that we carry down the street. We come together with people once we're comfortable with our own self. And the focus needs to be upon our own self, rather than coming from a wounded space where we divide and separate other people because they don't agree with us. So it's not until we have valiant leaders, in all forms of power that we allow for in our existence, that we as individuals can start to drive forward our own truths, where we can start to bring love into a space where we don't seek love by having a meltdown, because we can't actually bring ourselves to ask for help. We can't ask ourselves to have the courage to expose our own uncertainty, our own doubts and fears, and eventually we hold on to them and they become us. And then we find excuses, we find pharmaceuticals, we find other forms of psychology and baseless types of information that keeps us caught up in a system that we never want to be in. There was I remember years ago, a speaker I was listening to is that 1 out of every 10 visits to a medical doctor is because of an organically disease or condition that would be subdued or passed within 3 or 4 days of rest and sleep and good care and well-being for the individual. The other 9 out of 10 were based upon the medications or the directions that were given from those people originally coming in with that organic behavior and not just resting and allowing their body to recuperate in a natural and native way, but then buying into a system of ingestion that affects that. So, and that to me is not about against the medical institution. It's about where we give away our sovereignty because we choose to have someone else tell us what is right or wrong for us. We've got to be able to discern within our own self and love our differences, because the reason why racism is such a big thing, feminism is such a big thing, is because it's the people that do not accept that within their own self. They don't accept their differences. That women these days are trying to be like men, and they want the same thing, but they're different, and that's the beauty of them. I mean, there's so many things women can do that men could never do, and the whole part of that when we're trying to be the same, this is where we're stepping into a space that is not sovereign, but is dissolved by this expectation of living in a state of who.
Diluted.
Who requires us to live at a physical level. It requires us to compare to every other who. Some may call it the ego, but in a simpler form, when we are looking at who am I, it is regarding what other people have done, the experiences I had based upon my beliefs, living past or future, not in the moment. When I ask, what am I? And this is I believe every citizen, not a citizen, let's get rid of that word. That's every individual. I mean, because a citizen, to understand very quickly, is a subject of a republic without any rights. And these are just some of the wordplay. But if we go down into this part, what am I? So we need to ask that of ourselves as a point of standing so that we know when we have value, when we have freedoms taken away, we can actually recognize that. But if we don't actually understand what we are and then going deeper into that, well, am I a human being? Am I prepared to ask those questions? Do I have the capacity within myself to discern what is true here or not true? So we've got to get out of this who from comparison rather than into the what. And when it's the what, everything opens up and it is relating to our own responsibility and capacity to share. So, we've got to let go of, I suppose, what science has done, and because there's beauty in that there's, and these types of perspectives that cause us to not allow within our own selves. We go back to the virus. I think we might have been saying a couple of weeks ago that, people were coming on and talking about the 360 million viruses that we have within ourselves and how the immune system works, and going into that for an hour. Now, if you're going to study to be immunologist or you're going to be specializing in that field, great, good for you if that's what you're going to do. But this is not the type of information that the common individual needs to understand, because these organs, this system, it works best without interruption. As soon as we get the mind involved and we think we know better, we start to interrupt and we start to get away from the very nature of life, which is to express ourselves under the truth and basis in a relationship we have with ourselves, to be supported by what we have. As soon as we start to infect it and interrupt it with our own thoughts because we believe we can or we should, we are an individualized expression that is here. It's the beauty of life is to discover that. And that's where we find sovereignty, not through documentation, not through direction of another, not through the freedom just to speak, but the freedom to understand ourselves and freely express that. There is, I just saw some things here of OxyContin as our dominant hormone. Who cares? It's irrelevant. It's not for you to interrupt that. A healthy, holistic approach, a goal and a growing community, yes, amazing. But these types of things, what I'm trying to say is, as much as they may be relevant and they can be repeated and they can be observed, what difference does it make to me in expressing the truth and the freedom that I have in myself in the difference that I have? We have isms in life simply because we do not love those differences. And, what was that time in where there was African Americans who were going and dyeing their skin like celebrities to try and become what they were not? I mean, it's plastic surgery and all of these types of things from around the world. And, when different countries became westernized, how they would dress differently and they would lose all the stuff in a part. It's important that we speak into that particular space, because what I'm focused on, and we had a conversation before and we've had many, but, people will continue to roll out in their life what they are challenged by. And they will continue to keep looking for people who will anchor down with them and agree with them so that they don't have to move forward. The greatest part of life is movement forward. It is movement. You know, it's the expression of life. And for us to move forward, when we are most challenged by life, eventually that nurturing and that soft space, it has a great place. But that's what we need to have with ourselves. But to be able to have that remembrance and someone's capacity to believe in you to such an extent to drive you forward, to move past the pain that we have taken on, the glass ceilings that we've been stuck under, the habits that we continue to keep falling over at the same point before, like we did previously. We've got to get out of the cycle of reliance and dependency and into the fear and embracing that fear of the unknown. I mean, that's where life is created. I mean, that's what questions are about. That's what children demonstrate to us each and every day. They're not fearful of going out and getting hit by a car. They're not fearful of being taken away by someone else. Kids are out there exploring themselves. And I would suggest that once we recognize our capacity, it's our fears that we place upon them that put them in dire situations. A child left uninterrupted is the greatest example that we can provide ourselves to if we get past the ignorance that because we've now become an adult and we've become educated through academia, not through life, that we know things. And what we know is the problems we've got in life, and we start to make decisions towards safety rather than towards expansion. And, you know, we need to have these conversations. We need to, as individuals, embrace that I don't know. I am not sure, rather than confusing with assertive confidence about opinions that don't actually lead to the point when someone says, oh, this sounds great. Well, how do I do this? That's what we need to be recognizing, rather than, you know, the internet-based weekend course driving opinions of what people should do in their life. I mean, this is about invoking within individuals a capacity of example to bring freedom, not to be fighting a government for it, because they only have power because we give it to them. And until we recognize that, nothing will change.
Yeah. That's very interesting, and I just wanted to go back to like we were talking about at the beginning of this this event occurring, and I think that's probably the thing that really sort of startled me as well. I've spent a lot of time. I've been fortunate enough to be able to have time to be able to do research and study that the average person cannot do, or doesn't have the luxury of the time to do. But I think that's probably the thing for myself, and also a lot of us are really sort of startled about how many people are just towing the line and being told what to do. And whether we're talking about, we're talking about lockdowns, we're talking about masks, we're talking about vaccine coercion. It's just that there seems to be that, it's more than ever now. People are waking up and questioning the narrative. But I think that's the thing that really startled me, is like how many people, and a lot of it's projection by media. I watch it every now and again just to see what they're projecting, and they're attempting to seed consciousness with their narrative. But there is a lot of people in the world, Jason, that want to be safe. They want to be told what to do. They want to be told where to go, where to be, what to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Paul. And I think that's the whole point when an individual gets caught up in saying, I want to save the world, and they start to interrupt other people's decisions to be that way. That's where the problem is. We're not sitting here, and there was a guy, I think Shervin, his name is online, he talked about it's not about waking the sheep, it's about activating the lions. So, and a big part of that is getting people, ready to stand forward. But if you are aware that there's issues and there's inconsistencies and there's travesty at law, the thing about that is, if you're not prepared to take action upon it, well, don't interrupt those that are. But if you're aware and become at ease within yourself that, well, I can see all that, I don't need to oppose what you're saying, but I'm actually quite comfortable getting pushed around or getting directed. And I'm come to the place where I feel that I would prefer safety in this lifetime. That's the contrast of life. When we start to sit there, and this is a distraction that many people say, I just want to help other people, I want to change the world. Change yourself, and if you continue to go into the depths of yourself, you will never come to the end of them. And if you continue to keep traveling through that, you'll find more people coming into your life that you're influencing because you're creating more space around you, and it's more definitive what you stand for. There's a resonance, like a beacon that goes out into the world. But when we start to intend to change others by helping and supporting them, we intend to manipulate. And this is where there's a lot of high profile speakers out there, and that's the intention, that they want to take responsibility because they believe that other people can't live their life without the benefit of their wisdom. You know, we've got to make choices where for individuals that they'll come forward when they are ready. It's the same as when you look at a child and say, well, oh, I really hope they don't get in trouble at school. I better be there to help them out. I better do this. What we're saying is, and projecting on that child is, I don't trust you. I don't believe that you're capable of doing this yourself. I believe that you can only exist with me, which ultimately is a lie we tell ourselves because we're not pursuing our own path. If we want to have strength in our children or those that look to us, for example, is that we walk through those walls. We walk through those challenges in our own life, and that becomes the individual. They are a representation of our own actions, not what we tell them to do. People don't like being told. They won't be told unless it's consistent with the actions that you're presenting as well. So, yeah, I would have to admit, you know, I can speak into certain spaces, but I'm aware of, let's just say, certain aspects of what my rights are. And when I'm confronted maybe by a part of the constabulary and they were to come and ask me some questions and I felt that was out of order, yeah, there's an aspect of me that I reckon I don't understand that enough at certain points in my life and certain situations because I haven't educated myself. And I would like to. I'd like to present that. But you know what? That's not my area of expertise. When it becomes more relevant, it will. But my focus is upon teaching. You know, I could probably have an impact in other areas, but it's nowhere near to the degree or the extent of what I can do in this space, in my understanding and my exploration. So I spoke to a guy who has the experience that because he is so well versed and passionate and understanding, but extremely respectful, because a lot of people that learn about these types of lawful sovereignty start to use in such a way where they're nearly trying to get revenge and they're just being divisive. You know, there has to be respect all the time rather than saying, well, look at you, you're pig, you know, you're a part of a corporation. That's not achieving anything. That's just pain that's being projected. And
it's on the other end of the spectrum. They can just end up occurring as smartasses and just being antagonistic.
Absolutely. So respect is key there, but it comes from our own self. But what I'm suggesting is this guy, he has the experience now when people go to pull him over, the police, they don't even ask him for a license because they know he knows the laws and his rights. They don't even actually pull him over. Many times he's saying that people pull him behind him, or police pull him behind him, and as they stop, they just drive off. And he said that happens 99% of the time. Now, some people would say, well, oh, geez, that'd be good, and then I wouldn't have to deal with that and blah, blah, blah. The revenue raising and, you know, the exploratory questions, which might be offending your own privacy. The thing is, that just didn't happen once. He went to court 25 times, but the thing is, he has liberated a pathway for others that they can learn from his experience and not need to go through 25 court cases to get there, but they can start to move towards that. And this is where we come as individuals in discerning to be able to follow that, but not sit there and go, well, I'm going to go out and do that. We must have respect for ourselves. And again, this is sovereignty. An element of sovereignty becomes, I need to see the value and the worthiness within myself. So I need to respect myself, be patient with myself, nurture myself. And therefore, if that's the case, I can then become sovereign because I explore that. And I then am also respectful because look, independence is not about screw you. It's not about I'm going to do it my way and I don't care how it affects you. Independence actualized is about the acceptance and the understanding of other people's independence that's contrary to yours. You know, and if we don't accept that contrast and we start buying into a dictatorship of you've got to be like me or we've got to do it my way, you know, there's a gaping hole that is exposed in our education. And I would say not just the indoctrination of mainstream, but, you know, we've got to realize some of the ways in which we buy into and what we put our money towards when we're buying into a teaching or a learning that is fun, or is it actually going to expand and elevate me in my life?
Yeah, it's interesting. And you know, the thing is with the beginning of this, event in March end of March 2020, and then we're about to sort of, it occurs intuitively that we're about to experience a resurgence with what's happened. For people who are not tracking with what's happening in Victoria and Australia. I know we're international, but with what's happening with Victoria and Australia, and also with Western Australia and Perth and that sort of thing, locking down 2 million people with one case. There is a lot of emotion that gets driven up. The trauma gets driven up, and people would say to you, Jason, yeah, that's great in theory, but like when it's coming at you, when it's, you know, your financial position's threatened, when you're being intimidated, when you're being, you know, harassed, when you're being coerced, all those things, that it's a little bit of a highly held idealism. And for people that are just, you know, they're trying to keep their jobs, they're trying to keep their savings, they're dealing with all those issues.
Yeah. Great. I don't have any sympathy for that, Paul. I won't have sympathy for anyone. I have empathy for that particular situation, because to have sympathy, it's like having sympathy for someone who has cancer. Yes, it's a bad situation. It's a terrible situation, but we've got to recognize there was a process that people went through to get to that particular point of where they now are. So ignorance is not an excuse. And until we actually have that particular standing, not with hate, not with judgment, but with reality, you know, if we don't start putting the pieces together that got me to this particular point where I'm now imprisoned by the bills that I have, well, then we're just going to go, oh yeah, well, you got to pay the bills. I suppose I should just go to work, you know, sell my soul for something I don't want and live a life of hate and discord in my own life. I mean, look, there is like a word that said that there's compassion, you know, and the thing is, we don't find ourselves in a position where we're having this type of conversation if you don't believe in people. I mean, and that's, you know, probably my biggest challenge in my own life is the belief. I tend to believe in people more than they believe in themselves, and that's why I find myself doing what I do. But you've got to hold that back into such a point and allow people to go through that journey themselves. It's not to say, well, you should be doing this and you've got to stop going and doing that job. There's an option there and a recognition that they've got a choice. So they will be, as it says, they will be known by their actions. And the thing is, when we can start to be accountable by that in our own life, we can start to live in that way by habit. So if we are in a situation like, to me, it's when would be the right time to start putting yourself first? Because and let me just explain this. This is not the confusion here. Well, that's selfish. That's got nothing to do with being selfish. That is actually self-full, as one of my friends uses the word. Selfish is when we expect other people to live the way that we want them to live. That is the nature of the person who says, I'm going to change the world and I'm going to help people out. You expect them to now live your way. That is the very definition of what selfish is. The truth of actually being self-honoring is about the individual being able to nurture and give time to themselves so that they can be authentic and integral and honest with those people around them. But this is the opposite to what we've been taught. But so the thing is, when we start to put ourselves first, that very thing that we believe needs to be fixed in the world is only there because other people are not putting themselves first. They're not addressing their own environment, and their own environment spills over into the lives of others. And eventually they find solace in murder, in rape, in a whole range of other things, because they are looking ultimately for a level of attention that they haven't been able to reconcile within themselves. When someone who is evil suddenly starts to realize the beauty of themselves, that they resolve themselves to the greater experience of life and the awe of their own significance. And there is no greater courage required than to accept our significance. And that will never be denied. And it doesn't matter what book is written, it is always going to come back to that same part. But for us to put ourselves first is what enriches the beauty of life of the people around us, because we see things that we've never seen before. We see magic in someone's eye. We have those wow moments like, geez, that person's really interesting. They're amazing. Wow, look at this particular day. Look at what we've created. We start to see and appreciate difference rather than the comforts of familiarity and the same. And this is, again, an opposition of the shadows with sovereignty, is familiarity. We are seduced by it, like to such an extent that for us to create as individuals, creation is often mistaken with reaction by doing the same thing again, but changing it marginally. It is it is often confused with innovating, which is something that already exists, but doing it better or refining. This is not creation. Creation is bearing something that was never in existence previously. It is bringing something that is unique to life, to form, to expression, to manifestation. So when we can recognize that we're just repeating, when we're staying in a familiar state, because what I would suggest in going to our own significance is it's unfamiliar, unknown.
Yeah.
And the thing is, that is the very definition of fear, is that when we go to do something, like I was saying before, to actually speak to that police officer, even though you might have read every book and be aware of what your rights are and that I don't need to answer a question, your capacity to be able to say that, to be able to get past the fact that you don't want to come across as disrespectful and, offend that person as well, that you want to be able to be clear, you don't want to be arrested, and all these other unknowns. So for many of us, we never take that step out onto the breach because we're fearful of what might happen. We become certain of our doubts, which is a conundrum we're all stuck in. It's very rare that we're certain of our own prosperity and our own creation, but it's in creation as we as individuals start to become sovereign because we bring forward something that has not existed previously. And the very organic and native process that we cannot avoid as we do that is exposed through business. So what that means is that if I want to bear something and bring it to the attention of other people in life, you know what? I have to expose myself. And as I expose myself, I'm bringing forward something that has not been seen. And what it is like raw skin, like a baby skin coming out into the sun for the first time. There's a good chance it's going to get burnt. Now, once it gets burnt, it starts to build its own resilience, and it is prepared for that the next time. So when the judgment comes, my response to it in my own body is not to get burnt, because I might have prepared myself with something that a coconut oil or I go shade, or I'm aware of the implications of it. So I prepare myself and I now respond in a different way. So as I start to do that, I'm going to have to learn to get past judgment. I'm going to have to learn to get past my own judgment, which is probably the main thing, that this is going to go wrong. It's not going to work. People aren't going to like me. I don't know if I can. And we become frozen by our own fear and uncertainty and the lack of sovereignty that we're exercising because we want to be like everyone else. So what happens when we go through this point of creation, it is automatically designed. It is divinely designed that when we start to bring something to life that has not been brought to life before, we will self-actualize and we will start to approach, not live in, but approach sovereignty. And when we go through that again and again, and this will be experienced by people that get up on stage and speak, they feel great or terrible before they do it. They feel great afterwards at times, but each time they're still confronted by that same fear because it's the unknown. It's the anxiety that comes up in our life that prepares us for the new place we're going into. Anxiety is a beautiful thing. It is the preparation of your body and giving you the energy to do what you've not done previously. But when we come from a place where we're dissolving our own self and we believe that anxiety is a bad thing, well, we're going to say that this is terrible and this is wrong and it shouldn't be happening, because it's impossible for me, if I was anxious, to compare it to your anxiety, because there's no way of comparing what is happening that's immeasurable within us. It's an energetic uprising that we've not yet created the foundations to live from. So sovereignty comes from, and is maintained, which is most important, from the depth of the foundations that we build within our own self. So like I was saying before, it's not about achieving sovereignty. It's not about achieving presence. It's not about achieving success. It's about having the courage to go into, through creation of our own life and moving forward, that we remove those things from our life, we release them, we express them beyond our life, that we no longer hold on to them, are the things that oppose what it is to be sovereign. That I'm not taking responsibility for the outcomes of my decisions. I'm blaming somehow the government, the doctor, the teacher, my parents. I've got to be able to reconcile that and go, well, geez, I'm actually blaming or holding into account. How many relationships, Paul, are lost in misunderstanding, but also in the depths of blame And here's someone sitting here in blame, waiting for the other person to change so that they can move forward with their life. This is the cycle we need to get out of, that I'm going to change other people's lives or that I'm going to change my own. But when we give presence, give audience to our own self over a consistent, regular, ongoing, continual amount of time and maintaining a relationship with ourselves, our significance becomes undeniable. The rewards that come into our life become unexpected, and we start to live again rather than repeat, rather than die and become indoctrinated by just following a path that is already laid out in safety. And if we want to do that, we have every choice to do it. But it's to recognize if we don't want to do that, we first have to step into our own space to move forward from there.
Mm-hmm. That's great, Jason. Thank you. Just in relation to that as well, it's the conversation is, and to be the devil's advocate in that situation as well, is that even if someone's doing the work and reaching a certain level of independence and so actualizing some sovereignty, people are saying, well, I'm still going to have to deal with at some point in time these external power structures, including governments and that sort of thing, and these agendas with vaccine coercion and that sort of thing that that individual might necessarily agree with or consent to. They're going to have to deal with other entities and energies, or whatever you want to call it, in that spectrum at some point in time, beyond the self. Like, they're not in a little bubble somewhere in a cave in the Himalayas or something or other. They're going to have to assimilate. They have to integrate. They'll have to make a choice at some point in time about what they'll be part of and what they won't.
Absolutely. But so do you wait until the physical experience that is confronting and knocking on your door, or do you become present to that in the space that you have? See, this is a big thing. We in Australia and in other parts of the world, there is the Commonwealth, and it means what it says. It is common wealth for all. But wealth is not just determined by the amount of gold I have in my cupboard. Wealth is the ability to be able to maintain space in your life. So when we find graciousness, when we find gratitude, when we find love for ourselves, part of us are challenged by being able to hold on to that, why others people in their own life don't have that. And what we tend to do is give it away. I should give this to them because they don't have. The very nature of that is it's a short-term and temporary nicety, but what it doesn't allow for is the individual to be able to find their way into your space. It's to allow and share education at that particular point on how they can do it and move forward. But to disempower someone by giving them a temporary fix that makes you feel good is our inability to be able to master and maintain wealth in our life, is to be able to maintain an abundance of something without feeling the need or the guilt to give it away to someone who hasn't created it. Mm-hmm. And this is where society is making people that are brilliant, that they want to bring equality. But isn't it interesting that equality is always about coming down to the supposed or the apparent weaker part of the equation? It's not about taking that.
It normally reduces to the lowest common denominator.
It's crazy, and what sort of encouragement or inspiration does that bring forward? I mean, the very notion of what we are in living life is being opposed by the way in which we're controlled. But if we continue to keep buying into it, we continue to keep buying into it. That's our choice. We give it our attention, it exists. So we've got to, if we can come to a starting point, and what I would say, you mentioned before, the work. It's interesting how people put this particular word upon things that are challenging. I've got to go to work. I've got to do the work. There is no work to be done. The experience of actually finding ourselves is no different to actually living. And, this is where the confusion of practices and processes and modalities have become so separated from a single awareness of empowering an individual. So we don't need modalities. We don't need medicine. We don't need healers. We've got to recognize all of these things are indications in our life that have got us to that particular point where we've strayed so far away from our own internal wisdom. So this is not going to be happening by one conversation. This is, in my intention, we've got to change this over generations. And, we're assembling leaders towards that particular space to do that. And it's not for everyone, but it's to recognize that there's not work to be done. We don't go into this separate state where I'm going to go and spend this particular amount of time. We start to learn in such a way, and through our learning, we become humble to what we've learned. And through that, we start to understand ourselves more, and we can take actions, not just in one area of life, but the real truth is what I'm learning in this area of life becomes a habit, and how I then express it in all areas of life. So we're not ever going to get anywhere by complaining about where we're not at and what we don't have. It is never going to change anything. It may perpetuate a temporary assistance that appears in your life, but I can guarantee you soon thereafter, if you're given millions of dollars because of the way it falls within you, if you still maintain that same space, that will be gone, and you'll find yourself in a greater amount of pain anyway. If it's not resolved, nothing born of man is going to change that. It's something that exists within our own self as to why we're here. And, we've got to be able to discern that. When are we buying into fantasies? When are we buying into disempowerment? And how much of my life am I spending each week on actually moving through the challenges of life? And do I have people around me that are going to always believe in me and direct and guide me forward because they're looking to expand to the greatest capacity of what I am? Or am I limited by what someone else can provide to me, or the system provides to me, and I'll just do the best I can with that? We've got to make that decision. It's not for me to make that for everyone else. It's for an individual to do that. And
sorry, Jason, can I just ask you, because we're starting to run out of time there as well, can I just ask you in relation to, we're talking about sovereignty in the shadow, so can we just talk about, touch on the shadow? Are you drawing the parallel in the context of the shadow being the unconscious or the blind spots?
Yeah, the shadow is the unknown. It's the shadow can manifest as dark and evil and sinister.
Yeah, because people talk about doing the shadow work, right? Doing shadow work. It's a bit of a new age nuance.
A new age, it is a bit of a shadow work and the dark night of the soul and all of these things. And look, I think they're great philosophies, and they are. But we've got to have. Which I'm dedicated to is, and all I believe in is the navigation of the unknown. Yeah. When someone can do that, and that's in its most simple terms, that you're going to fall over. When you fall over, as long as you know how to get back up, it doesn't matter what you trip on. It's just getting back up and learning how to move into the unknown, because that's what life is. So that's where so many of us have created an identity in our own life, and we live by that identity. We defend that identity because we don't know how to be any different to anyone else and embrace ourselves. So what I found the most simple things in these shadows of life, it's not we don't want to see them, because when we liberate them, that's where we find the most, upwelling of joy in our life, that we can't rip the smile off our face no matter what happens. There's a confidence and a certainty that becomes us. It doesn't matter what people say in those moments, that it's irrelevant. Yeah, great for you. These things start to dissolve. So, we look to, I suppose, the shadows. We can have, Paul, I would say, what I believe that we're moving to, and the opportunity that we've always had. Because what we're experiencing with this hoax and scam that's going on, it only exists as a hoax and scam if you want to even buy into the fact of its existence. It's the same with any other aspect of your life. It only exists, it only impedes you if you allow it to. So we've got to buy into, in our own part, do I have the capacity to move into the unknown? Not just when it's convenient, but all of the time. Do I have the capacity to admit what I don't know, or am I someone who likes to repeat wisdoms and I become satisfied with that? But my real truth is, when I come down to it, if I put attention upon myself in a very simple practice, where am I then? And to what degree am I prepared to expose that? I know you've had a laugh at this, but there's a guy that I know, I think it's John D. Martini, who said, when you bring your privates public, you have mastered your life.
Yeah. And
that doesn't mean, like many that want to, and that's part of life, having fun and joking. That doesn't mean going and flashing and opening your jacket and, showing your tockley or whatever that may be.
Yeah, I was joking because it was a bit Freudian. But when you say making your privates public, were you basically talking about people airing their, because that sounds to some people like airing your dirty laundry, right?
Well, if I believe I've got something to hide, if I like to hang from the ceiling when the fan dressed in a particular way, and that's the way I like to get my enjoyment, I'm only not free in that because I can't express it to anyone. But when you have someone who's liberated and says, you know what, I love doing that, and it really turns me on, you in that moment are automatically liberated by their liberation. But when someone's there, it's the deceit of what they're not prepared to share for you that allows you to maintain a separation not a closeness, because we all accept other people for that. And if we don't, the beauty of it, you filter out those things in your life that you don't need to waste your time in a long-term relationship to only find out that truth eventually. But that is determined by our ability to be authentic. We don't all do it, but it's to understand, if we want to move towards it, our ability to express ourselves and to release that shadow, to shine light into those parts of our own life. It is more to do not with clearing and getting rid of darkness out of our life, but bringing light in and being able to receive it. Because I'll go into this quickly, but light in itself, love and light and these types of concepts, we've got to understand that the very notion of life has been taken from us. Light is not something that we should aspire to. Light is a result of liberating darkness. If we want to bring more light and we want to go towards the light, it's in going towards the light. It's where we've always been. The light is what we're already aware of. The light is what we're present to. And that's why people become seduced by certain teachings, because of the light and the lightness and the joy and the way in which people speak and the way they present. It's our foundation is all about our ability to liberate what we do not understand, what we have never been able to measure, what we can't touch, what we can't feel. It's operating from the energetic recognition of our own self, that our physical body allows us to be able to touch and feel and experience and express in a way that other people can experience for the betterment and expansion of their life, whilst I'm actually doing it for myself. So those particular aspects, we've got to realize that light is only a result of our liberation in our own life. When we keep trying to chase after light, it's like chasing joy or that fun night or whatever that never comes, and we put all the effort into it trying to recreate. We've got to be creative from nothing, from the ether. What are we going to bring forward? And then recognize that the amount of fear and judgment we have upon ourselves, that we don't allow ourselves to do that. That's the greatest challenge that we have. It's light is just emanating consistently. And I draw a diagram to the fact of that the significance when we're a child, there is a small layer that exists between the sovereignty, the truth, the expression of what we truly are, and people seeing that. A child screams, a child expresses itself without consideration or consequence. If they want something, they get it. They don't care. They explore, they move into places. But many people look at an infant as being dependent. They're not dependent. They're dependent in a way in which, certain things occur, but they are as in actualizing themselves and being able to maintain and get attention, which is far more important than nutrients. Those individuals at that age know how to do that. Yeah. So the thing is, when we as individuals start repeating life because we think we've got it worked out, that's when we start to die. That's when we start to fall apart. That's when we start to separate. That's when we start to argue. That's when we start to create shadows in our life, because we stop exploring what is there to be liberated. And that's where joy comes in our life, through the darkness.
Fascinating. And that's probably a perfect conclusion to the conversation, which is the episode 7 of the Actualising Independence series. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your time, Jason.
Can I just answer one of these questions here, Paul? I know you love it with the time thing, but because I want to just break this down. I mean, as you know, everything that's been said here has come through in the moment. There's been no sort of scripting or anything that comes to that. But there's a question here: what would a day in the life of Jason look like, if I may ask as an example or role model? The thing is, it's important to understand that as an individual, I've got so many things that I need to deal with. I've got so many things I need to move through. But to me, it's about embracing them and not hiding from them. I think that to look that we get to a place or a paddock or a spade of heaven where we find freedom, that's not going to happen where we don't have to deal with life. It's our learned ability to be able to embrace what comes. To me, I deal with the challenges of my child and, the receiving the love that comes from him. I live in a beautiful place, and I deal with the challenges of being able to get out and enjoy it as much as I'd like, in balance with the projects I want to bring into my life. And I think about at times how I can, express myself more, and whether I'm loved by the people that I want to be loved by, but these are all part of that particular journey. And I've learnt to recognize, and what I would say in vulnerability is living in a life where I don't know what's going to be said next, because that's where that comes out. But there is definitely, I would say and hope, that there's no aspiration to look to someone else that I want to be like, because the whole journey is to be yourself. But I do understand the question. It's very much important, and if I could say this, is to find something, a direction, a manner in which you can learn to navigate the unknown, to navigate the darkness in life, until such time that it doesn't become the darkness, because it's a part of life that you embrace that leads to your own liberation. So there is, and Paul's probably going to ask the question, but we do have something called the quantum movement, and where we share a lot of that. And it's a choice that people make to be confronted by that. It's not something that I guarantee everyone finishes, because it does bring people to a recognition of their own self. So it's for a certain type of person that will resonate. But I think we're going to do a little bit of information in the future about a webinar and just going into what that actually looks like if people want to be involved in it. But these discussions are more for, wrapping out part of these particular topics.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions there, Jason, before we close out?
No, not that I'm sorry if I haven't. I just saw that one just as we were there. I can't seem to control the chat part, but no, I think it's I think it's the one thing to remember is humility, that when we can be overwhelmed by a lot of information and possibility, we've also got to recognize that, we crawled, then we walked, and then we ran, and having the patience to be able to do that in time, that we now trust ourselves to walk, to run. We crawled, first of all. We were down on the ground. We needed and we required things, but it came from our own self. Mm-hmm. So be patient with your own learning. Be patient with your own understanding, and accept that the reason why I don't understand things is I haven't been exposed to them yet. But I've got the choice of whether I want to be or not. Don't get past the judgments that are naturally going to occur when you expose yourself to life.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always been a pleasure, Jason. Thanks for joining us today on the series of Actualising Independence.
Thank you, Paul, and love the space you're creating. And and thank you everyone for joining in the comments. And have a great one.
Absolutely. Much love.
Much love.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another message from the underground. Want to know more? Head over to Facebook and search for our private Facebook group, Messages from the Underground, or visit www.messagesfromtheunderground.org. To connect with Paul Seils, please visit paulseils.com. Stay human, protect the planet, raise the consciousness.